So we have come to the end of our little journey together on this earth. I neglected to ask, maybe you know the answer to this, since you do have those in class, should I just sort of keep one and they'll come back as I'm winding things down?
You go to the outings.
But they will come in and we won't stop and then start again, correct? Okay, that's what I was going to say. There's no good point really for me to do that. This being the last evening, certainly I'm honor-bound and duty-bound to say a few things of personal nature, but it really doesn't feel that way to me. One of the greatest joys of my life is to do what we have done this week. Actually, 3 times. I had 4 meetings this fall. 3 of them were with congregations where I've never been before. And that is a unique joy. Because life is a struggle at times on this earth. We get a little bit tunnel vision. And we get a little bit like Elijah and want to maybe find the nearest cave and make our way in there and say, Lord, I alone am left, and now they're after me. And the Lord did a couple of wonderful things for Elijah when he was, and I think I'm safe in saying this, I think Elijah, if we were to have a doctor examine him today, would say, you're suffering from depression. I think that was pretty obvious. But he did a couple of wonderful things for Elijah. One of them is when he said, we don't have time for that. And he did. And instead of saying, now curl up in a ball and feel sorry for yourself, he said, Elijah, here are 3 really important things I need you to do, and I need them done right now. And the other thing he said, and by the way, you might think that you're alone, and you're not. You might be outnumbered, but you're not alone. I have 7,000 out there in Israel who've not bowed the knee to Baal. And so, life is a battle, and sometimes we can get to the point where we think everything's wrong, everybody's wrong, and that's a dangerous attitude. God always has good people out there, and I need to meet them. And I didn't say I like meeting them. I love meeting them, but I said I need to meet them. I do, and you all have been just great encouragement to me. And I will remember this with such fondness in the future. Every place I go, there's a piece of me that I leave there. I mentioned what I do in Kenya. There's a big piece of my heart that stays in Kenya. You ever go on my Facebook page, they have people listed as your family. And if you look at mine, I don't know who all of my family has registered themselves as my family, but you'll see various siblings of mine, and then you'll see one face that kind of stands out as it's considerably darker complected, and that is, he is listed as my brother. And that's Brother Bernard Kagaga, who is there in Kenya. And he requested that, and I thought, yeah, okay, let's go with that. And I'm so happy to have him there as part of my family. So I don't know if all my sisters and my brother realize that Brother Bernard is their brother, but I'll explain that to them sometime, I guess, if it comes up. But it is just such a wonderful thing to have this experience with you. I do so appreciate how you all have cooked. I consider myself an expert on eating, not cooking. And I think I would be remiss if I did not announce one thing that did not get announced. Brother Lance made a special request to announce about Luke killing those 2 deer today. And Lance, don't turn around and look and see what he's doing, but yes, he wanted us all to be sure to know about what a great thing that was, that Luke had such success in hunting. And he was so gracious as no, I'm kidding, he's actually been quite resentful. We're going to look at Nehemiah chapter 8 tonight and close the series of lessons. You know, this has been kind of a back and forth. I said it was calling on the name of the Lord. It was Nehemiah, but I was going to vary from it, and I'm going to vary from it tonight. There's not much. I guess you could twist and force and say this is calling on the name of the Lord too, and in a sense it is. But what it is mostly is just the way that I want to close this meeting. How's that? And in Nehemiah chapter 8, verses 13 through 18 is where we're going to read. The text reads as follows. And on the second day were gathered together the chief, the fathers of the people, the priests and the Levites, unto Ezra the scribe, and even to understand the words of the law. And they found written in the law, which the Lord had commanded by Moses, that the children of Israel should dwell in booths in the feast of the 7th month, and that they should publish and proclaim in all their cities and in Jerusalem, saying, Go forth unto the mount, and fetch olive branches, and pine branches, and myrtle branches, and palm branches, and branches of thick trees, to make booths, as it is written. So the people went forth and brought them and made themselves booths, every one upon the roof of his house, and in their courts, and in the courts of the house of God, and the street of the water gate, and the street of the gate of Ephraim. And all the congregation of them were come again out of captivity, made booths, and sat under the booths. For since the days of Joshua the son of Nun, unto that day had not the children of Israel done so, and there was very great gladness. In case you're wondering, this is written in the 400s BC. Joshua lived about 1420 or so. So about 1,000 years. Almost 1,000. Here's what you need to know going in. Now we're going to start talking about this incident, and then we're going to kind of widen our approach to include the feasts, because there's just too many good things I need to say tonight. But if we go back into chapter 8, what you find, this is a great thing too, and I hate it that I didn't have time to cover it, but it was when Ezra came and he taught the law, and it's what we sometimes call the dedication of the law, or rather of the wall that they had completed, that we talked about several days ago. That Ezra preached to the people. The Bible says they had a wooden platform, in the Old King James called a pulpit. But there he preached. He gave the sense of the reading, and it's just such a wonderful thing. If you go back and read it, you see the respect these people had. The book is open, and they all stand. And the Bible says the young and the old, everybody who could understand, they were gathered there. But as they read, and as Ezra preached to them, they came to realize that there were some things that were written in that law that they had not been obedient to. There were some things that were lacking, and it shocked them, and it hurt them, and they began to mourn. So, what they were told was this. It is inappropriate for this mourning to take place at this time. And at the end of the lesson, when we get to the actual feast of what's called the Feast of Booths here, I think you're going to see why. He says, John, we're not going to do that today. The first thing we need to do is correct this and have this feast. And so what we're dealing with here is the third of the three major feasts. Now the three major feasts are defined by the requirement that all of the males of Israel were there in assembly. Okay? They were the Passover, Feast of Weeks, and this one, the Feast of Booths. However, my estimation, most of us have missed what turns out to be an extraordinary opportunity for learning here. I need to tell you before we go any farther. I am not one who, as a Bible student, is quick to attach significance to things that isn't there. You pretty much have to drag me kicking and screaming in order to say and agree, yes, and if you're familiar with this terminology, yes, it's type antitype. I'm not a person who reads the Old Testament and I see a principle everywhere I look. It took me a while to come around, but I did. And when I show you these things, I'm of the opinion you'll think so too. That God established these three feasts in order to teach Christians something. Give me a fair. Let's start with the Passover. Now, the Passover is probably the most familiar to us of the three Old Testament feasts. And it's still important to people who practice Judaism today. If you've ever heard of the Feast of the Cedar, that is Passover. Now, the Passover originated in Egypt. So we'll go back and we'll talk about the establishment of the Passover in Exodus chapter 12, and we'll look at a couple of verses there. In Exodus chapter 12 and verse 7, we're reading about what to do with the lamb that was sacrificed. Now, there are other lambs, in fact, there are many other lambs, and I wish I had time to tell you about some of the significant portions of these other lambs. There were lambs that individuals had to sacrifice as a result of their own sin. There was a lamb that was sacrificed at the Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. This was a family lamb. God established the Passover as a family feast. And so it was something that was to be done as a family. However, there were also allowances made for what you might call a pseudo-family. Incidentally, Jesus and his disciples constituted one of those, as they intended to have and did have the Passover together. But that's a little bit of a tangent, so let's go back. Let's talk about how it was established. Okay, now if you're reading through Exodus chapter 12, there's something really interesting there. On the 10th day of the month of Nisan, they were to go and they were to select this lamb. Then on the 14th day of the month of Nisan, so it's in your house for 4 days. At that point, you slaughter that lamb. Now, when you bring a lamb into your house for 4 days, it does not matter how many times you tell the kids, do not make a pat of that lamb. Guess what they're going to do? They're going to make a pat of that lamb. And on the 4th day, you take a knife and you cut its throat and you watch it bleed to death while it's bleeding. I imagine there were some tears shed. I often tell the story about, and I won't tell you the whole thing, but I'll just kind of bring you to the end of an incredible sight I remember when I was 11 years old. We had goats on the farm, and it was in May of that year. I walked out the door. I had to walk about a quarter mile to get to where I picked up the bus, and here sat Dad in a lawn chair underneath the tree where we fed baby goats. We used to put a nipple on a 16-ounce Coke bottle and shake up the formula and give it to him. Here's Dad holding this goat, and I can see him now, and he's going, oh no. Oh no, oh no, shaking. Its twin was dead at his feet, and I think the one he was holding was already dead. There's something about that lamb, and I mean, this was a farm. We killed things routinely. My dad was crying like a baby over a little baby goat that died. They sort of get to your heart that way. So you take that little lamb, you kill it. Why would God do such a cool, heartless thing as that? Well, it didn't end there. If you go to verse 13, he's telling them what to do with, or excuse me, verse 7, he tells them what to do with blood. He said, you will take of the blood and strike it on the two side posts, the upper door posts of the houses, wherein you shall eat it. Well, why? Verse 13. And the blood shall be to you for a token on the houses where you are. And, you ready for the lyrics to a song? When I see the blood, I will pass over you. That the plague shall not be upon you to destroy you when I smite the land of Egypt. God said, all right, here's how to avoid the 10th plague. You are going to cruelly kill the lamb and take its blood and apply it over top of the door frame and on the top side post. And then he said, now this was to avoid the 10th plague in Egypt, so you were going to save the life of your firstborn son, not to mention the lives of all the firstborn male animals. But then, down in verse 24, he says this is going to be an ongoing memorial. And so for 1,500 years, Jews continued to practice the Passover with God's approval. He says in verse 24, he says, you shall observe this thing for an ordinance for you and for your sons forever. Okay. We got it. The Passover is really important. The Passover is sometimes heart-rending. The purpose of the Passover was to save the lives of your sons. And Christ is our Passover. Now, I'm not speculating. Because here's what we read in 1 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 7. Therefore, remove the leaven, that you may be a new lump. He says, therefore, purge out. That's Old King James language. Purge out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, as you are unleavened. Every single occasion in the Bible where leaven, which is yeast, where that's found, it's found in a negative connotation, except for one, and that is the parable of the leaven. And so here, when he's talking about the impurities in the church, he compares it to what you and I would call yeast. And he says, and then, see, this was part of the Passover, by the way, so it's not just two random statements. You've heard of the Feast of the Unleavened Bread. The Passover was one evening, and it initiated a week-long feast called the Feast of the Unleavened Bread. But for convenience sake, we usually just call the whole thing Passover, and I suspect they did as well. But the last half of the verse is the part that's really interesting. Christ, our Passover, even Christ, our Passover, is sacrificed for us. Therefore, all those years, since God is a knowing God, all of those years when people were practicing the Passover, they were really prefiguring, telling the world about what God was going to do with Jesus. Well, what was he going to do with him? You remember I told you about what a hard thing that must have been to take that little innocent lamb and slit its throat open? That was hard. God who ordered that one day was going to stand idly by and watch his son die. He is our Passover. Now, it might make a little more sense to us then when we start thinking about how not coincidental it was. Jesus just happened to be murdered on the Passover weekend. How many of you think that was just a coincidence? Matthew chapter 16, verse 21. For that time forth began Jesus to show to his disciples how he must go to Jerusalem. There suffer many things. The elders, chief priests, and scribes. And be killed. And be raised the third day. It was not just a coincidence that Jesus needed to be. Number two, he is identified, this is the place, and this is the time of Passover. He is identified as the Lamb. 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 18 and 19. For as much then as you know, you were not redeemed from corruptible things such as silver and gold, or with corruptible things such as silver and gold, from the vain conversation received by tradition of your fathers, but with the precious blood of Christ as of a lamb, without blemish and without spot. And when all of that is over and done with, now I'm not going to argue that the communion feast is the fulfillment of the Passover. It isn't. If we make the communion feast the Passover, we've missed the point of Christ being the Passover. But it concludes with an ongoing memorial of that, such as in Luke chapter 22 and verse 19, when the Bible tells us that he took bread and gave thanks and brake it and gave it to them, saying, this is my body which is given for you, this do in remembrance of me. Now, the communion feast on Sunday is not the Passover, but it is a continual reminder of that one time Passover of Jesus on the cross. All right, let's talk about the second one. Now, the second one has a couple of different names. One of them is the Feast of Weeks. And it's called the Feast of Weeks because it comes 7 weeks and 1 day after the Passover. And sometimes it's called the Feast of Harvest, although that one confuses us a little bit because we think of harvest as the end harvest. They didn't mean the end harvest, they meant the first harvest and first fruits. So if the Passover comes late March, early April, the next one, which is 50 days later, and that gives it its other name, the one that we know it by, Pentecost. 50. It's in the month of May. I believe it had a special significance. And if, again, you're reluctant to put a lot of trust in that sort of thing, I think I can convince you. I believe there was a New Testament fulfillment of the principles of the Feast of Weeks. All right, what is the Feast of Weeks? What was it about? I already told you one of them, first fruits. You know, as of the last 5 years, I've not been able to raise a garden because we bought a house. I mean, it's crazy. I moved out in the country and I don't have a place to raise a garden. But if you see where I live, there's no level ground. I've got 2 kinds of ground. I got poor ground, and I got ground with spring coming out of it. And I just don't have a garden spot. And some of these days I'm going to fix that, but I haven't got around to it yet. And I love raising a garden. But the only reason I brought it up is to tell you this. You know what the very best tomato is? It's the first one. It really is. I mean, I always raise a lot of tomatoes, and I'd go out there and I'd be inspecting them every day. I know which one was going to be the first one. And I was very generous with my tomatoes. I really was. I raised as many as, I don't know, probably 6 dozen plants at times. I mean, it was ridiculous how many tomatoes I raised. And what I mostly did was gave them away. I really enjoyed giving people tomatoes. Lord help the man who took my first one. That one is non-negotiable. That's what the Feast of Weeks is about. First fruits. Now, it had something else that a lot of people don't realize. It coincided with the giving of the law. So you have 2 things there with it. The giving out of the law and the first fruits. Now, in the New Testament, we have the promise of an event, and I'm calling it, I think, the Great Pentecost event, in which 2 things happen. The giving forth of the law, and let me go back. I meant the one from Sinai. It coincided with that, all right? But there is a great Pentecost event where God's law is given and there are first fruits. Isaiah chapter 2, verses 2 and 3. It shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountain and exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow into it. And many people shall go and say, come, let us go to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. This is the important part. He will teach us his ways. We will walk in his paths. For out of what? Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from where? Jerusalem. For our purpose and for anything other than poetry, those two are one and the same. So there was a place that the law was to come out of. Now the original Pentecost, it coincided with the law coming forth from Sinai. In this case, the law, the word, is coming forth from Zion or Jerusalem. But what about first fruits? Well, it turns out that God considers Christians to be first fruits. James 1:18, of his own will begat he us with the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruits among his creatures. Now, put your thinking cap on and tell me, was there a day at some point in the New Testament when you saw Isaiah 2, 2 and 3 being fulfilled, that is the word of God first being proclaimed in the city of Jerusalem, and you see first fruits? Where does that happen? Acts 2, guess what feast it was at? Is there any way that could be a coincidence? I don't see any way. I'm going to give you one more. And you might say, well, I don't know if you can prove that. I probably can't. But it seems mighty suspicious to me, and I think the preponderance of evidence will demonstrate this is so. Because something else happened while Moses was getting the law. I don't know if you remember this, then I'll bet you did. While he was up on the mountain, things kind of went haywire back on at the bottom, didn't they? Yeah. And when he comes back down, they had a golden calf. And I'll tell you something else. The Bible says the Hebrew language, and I need to do some quick explanation here. Most of the modern versions say they were unrestrained. The old King James said they were naked. This is one case where, knowing what I know about pagans and their religion, I kind of think, well, there was a comedian, let me put it like this, that said, it depends on how you pronounce the word naked, what's going on. He said, naked just means no clothes on. Naked means they're up to something. And knowing what I know about pagans, and knowing that the first thing they heard was singing when they're coming down the mountain. You ever notice this? If there's a large group of people singing together with no apparent reason for it, what's your immediate assumption? They're drunk. I'm serious. Large groups of drunks love to sing. Not very well, but they love to sing. I think they were drunk. I think they were not naked. And Moses, among the other things that he did, said, who is on the Lord's side? Remember that? Levites said, we're on the Lord's side. And he said, it is time for some blood to flow. Does anybody remember how many people they killed? You're going to love this. 3,000. 3,000 people died the day that the law of Moses came into being. Acts 2:41. Then they that gladly received his word were baptized. And there were, how many saved? Now you might argue that's a coincidence. I am not. I believe it tells us something about the nature of Christ's law versus the law of Moses, the law of sin and death. And I think it also is a great lesson to all mankind. There's a law coming. And on the day it comes into being, 3,000 won't die, 3,000 will live. That brings us to the last of the three feasts, the ingathering. Different kind of a harvest. It too goes by several names. It goes by the name Feast of Booths. A few years ago, I used to have to explain to people, that's not like a telephone booth. And you see this group of young people back here? I'm going to have to explain to them what a telephone booth is. So you go on to the next word. It's sometimes called the Feast of Tabernacles. Usually a tabernacle means a tent. It turns out that's not a really great explanation either. Okay, the ingathering is pretty good. In harvest. If you want to know where it comes in on the calendar, it's October. You ever notice how most of the county fairs are sometime between August and November? Did you ever notice that? Well, the reason for that is county fairs were started up to kind of celebrate the harvest. So they're all somewhere in that period. Back when we were a more agrarian society, a lot of things revolved around what was needed with the crops. So it had that flavor. But the most interesting part of the Feast of Tabernacles is you read right there. They went back and they read and they said, you know what, we've been missing this. Now, you can go back earlier and read in the book of Ezra. He mentions the Feast of Booths, but it sounds like they didn't follow it through all the way, and that's why they said they had not had one like this since the days of Joshua. Because the tabernacles in question weren't tents. They were what we used to call a lean-to, where you would take just sticks that you would find in the woods. Maybe some of you all did that. We did that when I was a kid. We'd go out in the woods and we'd build some shelter just to sit underneath for no apparent reason. We were building tabernacles. We didn't know that. Booths. Now, why would you do such a thing? As a matter of Thanksgiving, yes. Believe it or not, the Feast of Tabernacles was a nationwide campout. And you have to take a step back from this in order to get it, I think. Because you're reading through the Old Testament, you're studying, you're coming away with rules and regulations. And it is a rule. You will, Leviticus chapter 23, verse 42. You will dwell in booths for 7 days. All that are Israelites born shall dwell in booths. Is that an order? Yeah. But you know there are some fun orders? And this was one. I know we don't like using the word fun a lot. I can't get away from it here. All right, everybody, I know you have houses, but everybody in the whole nation, we're going to gather up and we're actually going to live even more primitively than they did in the wilderness. Why? Just to remind you what it was like. Do you know people that go places and they call it roughing it? Do you know people that rough it? Yeah. Nobody makes them rough it. Sometimes it is a terrible disaster when they rough it. Luke's dad and I, when we go to Kansas, everybody else our age, they're in nice campers. We are on the ground. I'm here to say we are too old for this nonsense, but it's a matter of pride at this point. And nobody ever comes back from one of those and brags about how easy it was, do they? Do they? They brag about how everything went wrong. We were just having this conversation last night about how many times the old vehicles that we drove have caught fire going out in Kansas. We go out there every year. When my wife calls me, the first question every year, don't tell her, I'm getting a little irritated about it, but her first question is, how many times have you caught fire? Not did it catch fire, it's how many times has it caught fire? And there's been times when I've had to say twice. Still fun. he was ordering them to have a joyous celebration. Think of it this way. They hadn't had it like that since Joshua, and don't ask me to explain how that worked with men like David and Hezekiah and Josiah. I don't know. I really don't. But I can tell you this much. They robbed themselves of joy. They really missed out. I don't know why they didn't, but they had. You know, the Lord's church is not all about directory. One of the reasons I always would tell people, if you really want to know why I decided to become a preacher, I mean, there are reasons, there are probably multiple reasons when you get there that you can cite, and I'm sure I had many of them. One of them was my best friend. My best friend was a preacher. I was studying something else in college, and we had the kind of relationship where he didn't have to mince any words. He just kind of let me have it one day. You're wrong. You're wasting and all this, He said things to me nobody else would say. That kind of woke me up. But another big factor, and it may sound shallow to you, but when I was growing up, the happiest people that I knew were members of the Lord's church. Absolutely the happiest people, and I can still listen to their laughter ring through the years and now the decades, and think about Dad, just his wheezy laugh with those brethren that he loved, and it was such a sense of joy and security to know the people of God were so happy to be Christians. I think if I had met some of the sourpusses later, it might not have worked out for me. Because there are some people in church that look like they've been weaned on a dill pickle. There's something good. There's something good in the church. The Feast of Tabernacles, to me, is a great reminder there's something good. But it's not all about just giggles here on earth. There's something more important than that. I'll tell you about. Why were they living under those conditions? Well, the answer is, it was a reminder about what the wilderness was and what they were looking forward to. See? It was a pilgrimage. 40 years in the wilderness was what this commemorated. That doesn't sound like something fun to commemorate. Yeah, it is. Because you knew it had an end and there was something better on the other side of Jordan. I don't want to tell you life can't be hard as a Christian. It can be. It has been for me. It will be for you. There's such a thing as hope. And if there's one thing I can get you to see today, above all else, it's this. The word hope is not future tense. Well, it's about the future. But it's not future tense. It's now. And so, where are you today? Well, according to the Hebrews writer, Hebrews 13, verse 14, we have no continuing city. We seek one to come. Hebrews 11 and verse 14. These all died in faith. Talking about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and went all the way back to Abel, the great men and women of faith. These all died in faith, not having received the promise, but having seen them afar off, were persuaded of them, and embraced it. That's just great. They had promises, listen to this. They had received the promise. All they had, through what had been described, they could see way out there was a promise that I am And now, what does it mean to embrace that promise? It means that you're going to live as though you believe God's promise, and then confessed they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. Which means, okay, I'm going to live as just like we've been singing all our lives. This world is not my home. I'm just a passing through. I'm going to live like that. And if this world is not my home and I'm just a passing through, and if the Feast of the Booths or the Tabernacles or the Ingathering, whatever you want to call it, it's a reminder that there is a final harvest when the Lord returns. In that final harvest, He's going to want to know something. Did you live through this world or for this world? Now, if you're a stranger, a pilgrim, you're not going to live for this world, you're going to live through this world. 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 11, I beseech you, dearly beloved, strangers, pilgrims, that you abstain from fleshly lusts that war against the soul. There are some of us, undoubtedly, who will lose our souls because we weren't strangers and pilgrims. We said, I'm not going to live in a booth. I'm going to mix up concrete. Right here's where I'm going to stay. I'm going to pour a foundation, and it's going to have a footer, and everything I'm going to do is going to be about this place I'm living in right today, right here on planet Earth, and we'll lose our soul. But if we're like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, of whom it is said in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 10, for he looked for a city which hath foundation, builder, maker, is God, to live through this world. We're going to sing this song of invitation. If you are not one of God's children, we're going to sing this to invite you to become obedient to the gospel. Jesus said, he that believes and is baptized shall be saved. That's just as true today as the day when Jesus spoke it. You want to be a Christian? That's the beginning point, not the end point, but that's the beginning point. As we've been discussing this evening, you want to live for it. I've often said to people, learning how to become a Christian is simple. I can teach somebody how to become a Christian in 5 minutes. Now, living as a Christian, that can be tough. And I don't want to soft soap it. I don't want to tell you it's easy to be Christian. Sometimes it's hard. I can tell you real quickly what you ought to do to become a Christian. There are going to be days when it's hard. Anything worthwhile works that way, doesn't it? You want to get married tonight? I don't have a license in Georgia, but if you want to go to one of the states I have a license in, I can do a marriage ceremony in 3 minutes flat, and it's easy. Now, which one's easier, getting married or living as a loving spouse? Which one's harder? Everybody knows that those of you with your wives or husbands beside of you are too chicken to tell me. How about this? Is it worth it? You better believe it. Being a Christian can be hard. It's worth it. If you're outside of Christ, we're going to sing this song. If your desire is to obey the gospel, will you come as we stand and sing?